Welcome to Discovering. I'm in Grand Marais to talk agates with a visit to the Gitche Gumee Museum.
Of course, it's actually the Gitche Gumee Agate and History Museum, and a lot of people do come here to find out about agates as well as some of the other beach rocks.
Stick around, it's Monday night and time for Discovering.
The secret streams that flow beneath the cliffs of colored stone. Forests thick and healthy with birch and pine and oak. Surrounded by the greatest lakes this world has ever known. The black bear's awesome presence as he roams the hills and fields. Call of the timber wolf, the loon's lonesome trill. The eagle soaring high above, the trout lies deep and still. These are what I treasure, the only way I measure feelings that I have for this fine land. There is so much to discover when you're a long-time lover of northern Michigan.
When someone mentions the words picking rocks, I still get a bit queasy envisioning the many days spent turning acres of rock fields into potato fields on my grandpa's farm. Of course, as we all know, there's more than one way to interpret that phrase. The picking part is similar, but the reasons for doing so are completely different. The Upper Peninsula is one of the best places on the planet to be a rockhound, and some of the most prized finds are agates. The best way to find out more is to take a cruise to the Gitche Gumee Agate and History Museum in Grand Marais and talk to the agate lady herself.
Welcome to the Gitche Gumee Museum. The museum was founded in the early 1950s by a gentleman named Axel Niemi. He ran it through the early 80s, and he made me into the rockhound that I now am. I bought the museum in 1998, and I had to redo the whole building, and then I reopened July 4th, 1999, so I'm going into my 19th season. The reason why I'm standing here in this museum and why I've operated it for the last 19 years is I used to hang out here with Axel. I actually was blind until I was 10 from too much oxygen in the incubator, and then by the time I was about 9 I could see a few inches, so I'd come in and hang with Axel and he'd put rocks under my face. "Karen, what do you see?" "I don't know, Mr. Niemi. What am I supposed to see?" And he'd explain the rocks to me. But then one day he said, "Karen, meet me in front of the museum at 11:30. But I ran the 4 blocks from my grandma's house and got out here, and I noticed he had a homemade telescope. He said, "Karen, step on the stool, look through the eyepiece, and don't touch the telescope." And as I carefully looked through that eyepiece, I saw the rings of Saturn. And Axel said to me, "Karen, given your eyesight problems, if you can see the rings of Saturn, you can do anything." And that was the first day of my life I believed that to be true. So it's a real privilege to carry on his legacy now. So Axel influenced thousands of people, taught them about rocks, and showed them a different perspective, and that's what I've tried to do too. In fact, the museum's mission is to teach people a new perspective, both in terms of rocks as well as about human history. Well, rockhounding is really a developing hobby. It was big back 50, 60 years ago, and then it kind of died out for a while, but now it's coming back. I think that people get so busy in their lives that they need to recharge their energies, their batteries, and they do come up here and look for rocks. In terms of how does the UP rank to other places, we're actually quite good, and there's a reason for that. For 10,000 years since the glaciers last retreated, there's been a lot of erosion. The glaciers also freed up a lot of different types of rock, and so we have an extreme variety of rock, especially between Grand Marais and Whitefish Point. Ice forms at the high water mark all the way around the lake. That's where the rocks are. And then sometimes as the ice forms, maybe the wind switches and the ice breaks off, floats around the lake. Maybe it beaches another time or two. But in the spring, the northwest winds blow all the floating ice with embedded rock, and that ice beaches for the last time between Grand Marais and Whitefish Point, and then melts and dumps its rocks. On our beach between here and Whitefish Point, we have rocks from the entire Lake Superior Basin, which makes it exciting when you're out on the beach looking for rocks. The most common question I get from people that come into the Gitche Gumee Museum is what's an agate? You know, I probably get that question at least a billion times a summer. So basically what an agate is a microcrystalline variety of quartz, mostly made out of chalcedony, which is the type of microcrystalline quartz, and it forms inside what were previously hollow pockets or seams, and the agates then self-organize to fill in that what was previously the empty space. So to be agate, you have to be chalcedony, and you have to have self-organized structure. This is a Lake Superior agate. And this one has, probably 6 different types of structure. You know, there's 20 or 30 different types of structure that the microcrystalline quartz crystals manifest in terms of how they fill in those spaces. And one thing about Lake Superior agate, we used to say it's the oldest agate on Earth, and unfortunately now there's some in Australia that are a little bit older, but we're certainly the oldest agate in the Western Hemisphere. Our agates are 1.1 billion years old. The typical Lake Superior agate formed in vesicle pockets in basalt that flowed out of the mid-continental rift 1.1 billion years ago. In some places along that 1,000-mile mid-continental rift, the lava actually piled up over 60,000 feet tall. That's taller than Mount Everest, many times over. And so those pockets then filled in with the agate, and then over time the basalt eroded, and the glaciers certainly helped that process, and the Lake Superior agate now is spread all over the upper Midwest. And in fact, you can even find some Lake Superior agates that travel down the Mississippi River all the way to the Gulf. But the nice thing about Lake Superior agates is that we have many different structures, perhaps more of the varieties of structures than any other agate in the world. There are no 2 agates that are alike. In fact, even if you cut slabs out of an agate, even the different slabs are variable. One of the most sought after agates are the candy stripe agates, the red and white. This is a beautiful water-washed agate found in the eastern UP. Any human being on the beach would pick this agate up. Even if you didn't know it was an agate, it's just a beautiful rock. This is a large Lake Superior agate that was rolling off of the Keweenaw Peninsula. You know, most Lake Superior agates are, frankly pea-sized, or maybe a little bit bigger. And I would guess, 1 out of every, 20,000 agates might be this big. This is a candy striped Lake Superior agate. It's been face polished or dome polished, which means just one surface has been polished and the rest of it is raw, but just beautiful red and white striping. This is a very colorful Lake Superior agate. It was found in Iowa at a terminal moraine. A guy was working in a gravel pit. In fact, most of the agates that he had were 3 times this size, and that's from the glaciers scraping Minnesota clean and depositing some of those Lake Superior agates in Iowa. When I teach people about agates, I like to concentrate on the various characteristics. Agates all over the world have some of these same characteristics. Now, one specimen may have more than one of the characteristics, but the number one thing for agates is translucency. Agates, because of the microcrystalline structure of the chalcedony, the geometry of that structure allows them to be translucent. Now that's different than jasper, which is a first cousin, and we do have a lot of red jasper on our beach. The microcrystals in jasper or chert, now this is a chert, these are first cousins, but the microcrystals are very round and small, and they pack together so tightly it's like BBs in a jar. These are opaque. Okay, another characteristic of Lake Superior agates is in the natural stage, chalcedony is this dense gray color. And when you see an agate, you're not going to see little sparkles like the milky quartz that you see on the beach. You actually see little sparkles of the milky quartz because it's macrocrystalline. You can see the crystal faces with your eyes. But with the agate, to see the faces of the crystals, you would need a scanning electron microscope. So look for that dense gray color, and I did cut this one open, and you can see the banding on the inside. One unique thing about Lake Superior agates is very often, in fact probably, 80–85% of the time, the nodules have been stained post-formation with iron oxide. We have a considerable amount of iron in our soil, all the way around the lake, frankly, and so a lot of Lake Superior agates have this iron oxide staining, found on the beach just like this. Another characteristic that you might want to look for are the conchoidal fractures. Beach rocks are usually pretty round and pretty uniform in their exterior, but when agates bounce off of other rocks, they often fracture and you get the conchoidal fracture pattern similar to the inside of a seashell. When you're walking down the beach, what you want to do is you want to have the sun in front of you so that the sun not only will show the translucency as it comes through the rock, but the sun will also glint off of these conchoidal surfaces. Okay, there's two other characteristics that I'll show with this rock. First of all, when you have those fractures, it often gets down to this waxy luster, so you want to look for that waxy luster. And you also want to look for irregular rocks. Because of the fracture pattern, a lot of Lake Superior agates are irregular in shape compared to the beach rocks that tend to be rounded. Okay, another thing that you'd like to look for is the pit mark husk. The original external surface has worn off, but as those pockets start filling in, sometimes there's another mineral that will form first, these little spears, and that softer mineral has worn away. So what you're left with is this pit-marked husk. And then I'll turn this one over and you can see the banding on the other side. Okay, the last characteristic I'm going to talk about is one that most people aren't familiar with, and that's the yellow limonite coating. When you take the iron oxide, over time that turns into limonite, and you'll see this golden kind of mustard color limonite, and that does not appear on very many rocks, pretty much just on agate, sometimes on jasper, so you want to look for that color. As I said, one marvelous thing about Lake Superior agates is the number of different types of structure that we have. You know, banding is the one that everybody's familiar with, but sometimes the banding pattern does something special. In the case of this Lake Superior agate, it's called a shadow agate. Every other band of this agate is opaque, translucent, opaque, translucent. So when light goes into the agate, it bounces off the opaque layer and gets refracted through the translucent layer. So when you move it back and forth, the light gets lost and it appears to be a shadow. Yeah, the best shadow agates in the world come from Lake Superior, Botswana, Africa, Morocco, northern Mexico, and Australia. But we certainly have some of the best. Okay, another form of agate is called the botryoidal agate or grape agate. You can also see the gray chalcedony color, but instead of the microcrystals of quartz cooperating with an overall structure, they all have their own little crystal parties here. So it appears as seemingly grapes. And then this one also has saginite, which can be random, but most often it radiates from a central point. Just to show you how bizarre some of the world's agates. In fact, there's 3,000 types of agate around the world. This one comes from the northern part of Brazil. Back in the 1970s, there was a calcite mine. The calcite crystals were very large with flat surfaces, and in the triangular vugs between those crystals, agate formed. So the name of this agate is called the polyhedroid agate. Here's another botryoidal agate from out west. This is called the snakeskin agate, and in this area they didn't have a lot of contrasting minerals, so you're not seeing the red and white, for example, but you can still see the agate structure. When I teach people about agate hunting, I like to describe a formula for success. The first aspect of the formula is focus. You absolutely have to have focus. You can't be thinking about your job or your bills or other responsibilities. The focus does not mean that you should look at every rock. So what's best is to learn the agate characteristics and then look only for those characteristics. Focus on the characteristics. Look at groups of rock rather than each individual specimen. The second thing is patience and time. Lake Superior agates have been spread out over the last billion years. They are not common. They are quite rare. You can find them, but you need patience and time. The third thing is confidence, and that's one thing that a lot of people don't realize. Look for the pea-sized agates first, right by the high water mark. Put those little agates in your pocket and declare yourself to be a successful agate hunter, and then you will be more successful. The last thing is knowledge and understanding. It really is important that you learn the best that you can on what the outer surfaces and the characteristics of agates look like, and as I previously said, then look for those characteristics. Now, in order to help you, I've developed resources. I do have an online class, but if you want to learn details about agates, I do have my Agates Inside Out book. And then a lot of people wanted to know just about agate hunting, so I did develop the How to Find Agates book. I've got a brand new book called Rocks Through Time, Book 1, Geologic Stories of 9 Stones. It's my first poetry. And this traces Earth history through the story of those 9 stones. Since this is the Gitche Gumee Agate and History Museum, I felt obliged to write the first history book. It's called Superior Land and the Story of Grand Marais, Michigan. I traced all of the things that influenced the development of the Upper Peninsula, and then the last half of the book, how those things impacted the development of Grand Marais. Okay, and I also like to make agate lamps and agate windows. For example, I've got my tower lamp right there and a table lamp over here. I also have a wide variety of pendants. Here's just one of the trays of pendants. These are rocks from all over the world, actually. The Dalmatian jasper, for example, is from a mine, highest mine in the world, on K2, the second highest mountain in the world. On the northwest coast of Madagascar, when they were looking for more ocean jasper, this is like around 2009, they at first didn't find any of that, but they found the polychrome jasper, and this is just a beautiful stone. These are some more shadow agates. This one is from Russia, and this one is from Morocco. 2 new minerals that I have this year. It's a new amethyst and quartz found in Madagascar, and I have these for sale. And there's also a new fluorite from Madagascar. Obviously, I have a Madagascar connection. This is pyrite, and this pyrite comes from Peru. These are called Moki marbles. They come from Utah and northern Arizona. The scientists don't exactly understand how and why they formed, but they do form in iron-rich sandstone. And my theory is that the iron can't compete with all the silica sand, so they all find their friends, and they form these round spears. Back when I was in 7th grade, my first science fair, I studied fluorescent rocks. Most of these rocks in this case are left over from my 7th grade science fair. And with the white light, they just don't look like much. What's going on with fluorescent rocks is they have mineral impurities, and with these 2 wavelengths, there's short wave and long wave, the electrons get excited and jump away from the nucleus, and then the nucleus gets mad and pulls them back down, and that changes the wavelength, and it gives off the color. Back in 2005, I had a booth at a rock show in Albuquerque, New Mexico. There was a silent auction. I ended up winning this Arkansas crystal from that silent auction. I like to feature unusual rocks. This is ocean jasper. It was first discovered actually 100 years ago, and then it went unknown to mankind until the 1990s when this French guy went looking for it, sailing around the coast of Madagascar. The original deposit ran out in 2006, but last year they found some more. Before I moved back to my family hometown in 1994, I worked for medical companies and traveled 1.5 million miles. Wherever I went, I looked in the phone book for rock shops, and if there was a rock shop, I'd go in and buy at least one museum quality specimen. But 2 years in a row, I had to give a speech down in Virgin Islands. And so I wasn't going to look in the phone book there because it's all coral, but I did, and I was very surprised in St. Thomas there was a rock shop. So I went in and I bought this beautiful water level agate. Well, I assumed that this agate came from Africa because I already had this piece in my collection. So I went up to the owner and said, I want to buy this piece of African blue lace agate. And he says, nope. I said, I can't buy it? He says, oh no, I'll take your money, but it's not from Africa. He claims he was fishing from a boat next to a deserted island at a secret place in the Caribbean, saw a cliff of this agate, went back with dynamite, blew the cliff apart, snorkeled for the rocks, threw it in his boat, transferred to his truck, and then he grabbed me and started pulling me behind his counter into the alley. I could hear something. He fashioned a cement mixer into a large tumbler, and he was tumbling these. So I thought he was jiving me because, you know, it sure looks like African blue lace agate to me, but I started thinking about it. I think this could be proof of plate tectonics as well, and that there's blue lace agate on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Several decades ago, there was a German geologist, and he hypothesized that when the continents last were together as Pangea, that the forests of South America and Africa colliding, he predicted would have created uplifting. And he went further than that and said that that uplifting then would have reversed the direction of the Brazilian rivers, which in fact did happen. And he predicted that because the rivers during Pangea time were flowing from east to west, the watershed that they would have drained, he figured must have included the diamond fields of Africa. So to look for proof, he went and dug in the Jacaranona River, which is on the west coast of Brazil, and he found these very large Brazilian agates that were naturally polished by the African diamond dust deposited in the sands of the Brazilian River during the time of Pangea. So these agates are proof of plate tectonics. The agates came out of the river just like this, and in fact we know that the diamonds had to come from Africa because there's no natural source of diamonds in South America. These are pictures of Axel Niemi, the museum founder. He was quite the character. A member of the barbershop quartet, quite musical, played the violin, the piano, and entertained people with his music as well as with his knowledge about agates. One of the things that came with the museum archive, it's a bunch of negatives from 100 years ago. This is actually Grand Marais Bay, and this is during the heyday of the logging. This is Coast Guard Point, and there's 15 or 20 schooners loading up lumber all at the same time. When Grand Marais exhausted all of their lumber, the railroad closed down in 1910, and most people left. My family stayed, the Niemi family stayed. Then he had to figure out how to make a living. They made 3 fish tugs. The first 2 were by hand, and the third fish tug, the shark, they used this pig boiler. And they would boil the planks of wood and then put them in a jig. This is a small jig for a canoe, but they made specific jigs for every line on the boat. He also had 2 different engines in his fish tug because he was afraid he could lose an engine out on the lake, and designed his own transmission system to go back and forth between those 2 engines. And lo and behold, he did have to use his smaller 1-cylinder engine to get back into port a few times. That's the actual nameplates and running lights off the Elk. That was the second one. And the first, that was the Swan. So the Swan was built in 1917, used until 1922. The Elk launched in 1923, used until 1939. And the Shark was launched in 1940 and was used until 1953, when the lake trout population was desecrated by the lamprey eel, so they gave up fishing at that point. This is 1941. These are keepers, 28 pounds, 32.5, and 48-pound fish. Okay, there's some people that first come in here and they don't know anything about rock hunting, and I get this question, why would you ever want to look for rocks? Well, once you do, it's like a treasure hunt. You find unusual things on the shore. If you find an agate, that's certainly a treasure. But it does allow you to recharge your batteries, so you can think you can think about positive things rather than the complexities of your life. So it's just a way to get outside, get some exercise, and recharge your batteries, and go on a treasure hunt at the same time.
Well, that's it for tonight. If you'd like to keep tabs on what's coming up on Discovering or see where we've been, go to 906outdoors.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week right here on Discovering.